David Wilson is a social worker for Denver Welfare. One of his current cases involves a boy separated from his mother and placed in a foster home after a police report of child abuse and a thorough investigation. Wilson talked individually with the boy, then with the mother, and later with us. The boy is 5 years old and has been in a foster home now for about 2 months. The abuse centered around the parents' way of handling an age-old problem.
So what, as you remember now, what were you doing that made her angry?
Playing.
The boy's mother is convinced her son was wetting the bed in some attempt to get even with her, although she isn't sure why he needed to do this. But to him, as he explains it, it was simply a matter of not being able to control himself, and when he lost control, he was punished for it.
In fact, I had to throw 2 beds away because he had soaked them real bad. I mean, it's not the cost of the bed or anything, but even so, I mean, he was getting older and he was broke before. I mean, I went along with him for a long time. I went maybe 6 months with just letting him go by his own, but he got worse and worse. And then I just got so terribly upset that I just took drastic measures.
And then what did Mother do?
She fed me on beans.
What, sitting down or on your knees, kneeling on the beans? So she put these beans on the floor, and then you, what? You knelt down on those with your knees?
Then she put some paper on them.
And then?
I sit it on my knees.
On your knees. Did this hurt you?
The boy has talked spontaneously with the social worker on several occasions about the measures taken at home to make sure he was in the right place at the right time when his problem occurred.
Do you remember telling me where you slept? Where was that?
In the shower.
On what?
On a towel.
It seems you were telling me something else that had happened. Do you remember about having been tied in some way?
I peed and my dad hung me some more.
Hung you?
Social worker Wilson told us of the boy's fears in his account of how he had been hung. The boy said he eats Cheerios, lots of them, because, and he looked so hopeful when he said this, if he eats Cheerios, he will be strong and able to defend himself when he goes home again. This was really the only protection he felt he had to physically cope with these adults who were punishing him. He explained that when he was hung, ropes were tied around his waist and under his armpits, suspending him from the ceiling from some rafters. He would hang over a pot that they had placed on a coffee table. The idea was that he would relieve himself in that pot, dependably, reliably, without ever having to wet his bed. Another instance that the mother herself talked about also had to do with the rope and tying.
So I tied him up at the end of the bed, and he would move and fight and everything, and then he got rope burns on him from him twisting and turning and trying to sit and trying to lay and this and that. And I said, David, I said, don't move around so much. I said, because you're going to get burns. I says, and then they're going to, you know, and I don't want the burns on you. And he just kept right on going and going and going. And I had to do housework too. And when I'd leave the room, then he would really squirm and everything. And that's what left the rope burns on him. So I kept him in the house so that he wouldn't be seen at the neighbors, because I was trying to heal him up. And he snuck down to the neighbor's house while I was trying to keep him in the house, and so that I could heal up these here wounds that I noticed that he had, and neighbors had seen him.
What do you think you could do to help out?
Stop peeing.
Many Americans don't regard this behavior we've heard described as unusual.
Well, there is a large body of the population who feel that a men's home is his castle, and that in fact the freedom to raise one's children any way we care to is an inalienable right. The fact is, most people rightly feel that their home is a free area where they can love and hate and run their lives, decide what they'll read and what television they will watch, and that they very much resent interference of any kind. And this is rightfully so, because it's the ultimate in democratic life, that you have an area of considerable freedom, which says if I don't hurt anybody else, I'm my own master.
In cases of child battering, our attention is naturally directed toward the apparent victims, the children. It is the children who draw our attention and our concern. Their hurts are visible and often the most obvious aspect of a battering situation. But from all the research, from all the combined experience of the members of the battered child team, one fact emerges again and again in case after case. In each case, there are two victims, the child who is beaten and the parent who does the beating. The team's experience has led them to conclude that no matter how badly injured or beaten the child may be, the parent is equally in need of medical help.
Well, we think that the battered child syndrome is a real disease in the sense that when something that seriously goes wrong in the relationship between parents and child, even though the episode is one that lasts only a few seconds, that moment is one in which the child is not viewed as my child, but rather as something quite different, some hostile, dangerous element that must be in some way subdued, forced, aggressed against, even though it may last only a few seconds in its specific form. This particular expression of child raising is so extreme and so abnormal that it must be viewed as a disease.